Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Vitorian, and this is the 25th Hour. And this week's news for the week of November 29th to December 5th, 2020, de Blasio reopened elementary schools but is keeping middle and high school students home. Cuomo gets New York State hyped for vaccine distributions, and Trump is sticking to his guns by lying about voter fraud while he travels to Georgia to support the two Republican Senate candidates there. A quick announcement that we are taking off next week for the holidays, and we will be returning December 20th. Now, on to the show. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Starting with de Blasio. The mayor said that he's reopening elementary schools on December 7th, but is keeping middle and high schools closed for the time being. Special needs students can return December 10th. The school system won't use the 3% positive testing rate as a threshold for when to close schools anymore, and the hybrid in-person remote learning system is also being scrapped.
We are focusing on the younger grades. Let's be clear. Focusing on the younger grades on that Monday. All K-5 programs, whether they're standalone or part of a bigger school, those grades will come back, and those pre-K, 3K centers. Why? Because we know, first of all, studies consistently show that younger kids are having less of a negative experience, and there's less concern about the spread when it comes to younger kids. Also, the demands that our parents are going through, and I feel for all our parents who are experiencing so many challenges right now, how important it is for them to have their younger kids in school, how important it is at that age, both educationally and socially, but also in terms of how parents juggle all the challenges in their life.
Principals in city schools are going to have to figure out a way to convince reluctant parents to sign consent forms to allow their kids to get tested before entering the classroom again by Monday, as per the state and city school testing plan. City policy that redirects funds to neighborhoods with higher needs will end up cutting childcare slots for more than 500 kids and cutting the number of available childcare hours for almost 800 kids. City health officials increased testing for COVID to prepare for holiday travelers coming back after Thanksgiving, with the Port Authority having predicted 504,000 travelers passing through New York major airports this week alone. The economy in the city is still growing painfully slow, with the Bronx experiencing some of the worst effects, with 60% of residents on Medicaid in the midst of rising COVID numbers and the unemployment rate being 17.5% in October. De Blasio announced that the city would post wait time updates for COVID testing centers after social media posts constantly showed the long lines of people waiting to get tested. Following the announcement that Pfizer and Moderna were imminently applying for emergency authorization with the FDA, de Blasio said that the city will be getting about 500,000 doses of COVID vaccines, giving them first to healthcare workers, essential workers, and nursing home residents.
All right, now let's talk about, as I said earlier, the cavalry is coming. Let's talk about the vaccines. The moment we have all been waiting for is finally here. Vaccines are being approved. Vaccines are being shipped. We expect the first shipments as early as December 15th. That is 12 days from now. The Pfizer vaccine shipments we expect to begin for New York City. Moderna shipments a week later on the 22nd. We are working closely with the state of New York on a distribution plan with an important focus on those who have the greatest need and need to get the vaccine in the first efforts. We're going to be working with the state to fine-tune the approach, but what we all agree on is high-risk healthcare workers, obviously absolutely crucial to protect those who protect all of us. And we know from a painful experience how much we have to focus on our nursing home residents and the good people who work in our nursing homes. So those will be among the top priorities, of course. Now, over time, there will be enough vaccine for everyone, but we're going to have to prioritize in waves to make sure that those in greatest need get the vaccine first. This will obviously take months, but we're going to focus on the people who have the greatest needs. We're going to focus on those 27 neighborhoods that were most deeply affected by the coronavirus. We're going to certainly focus on folks who have borne the brunt, like people who live in public housing. But we're going to, throughout this process, work on the fastest and most effective distribution, because the faster we can move and the more we can educate people and the more we can get people involved, the more people who will be safe.
The city's Health and Mental Hygiene Commissioner, Dave Chokshi, said children under 18 years of age won't get vaccines anytime soon because there hasn't been enough consistent testing in the age bracket. The New York Young Republicans are notoriously in the spotlight this week for going ahead with their annual gala, even going so far as keeping the location secret to supposedly prevent, quote, left-wing attacks. They eventually held the gala in New Jersey, with no COVID precautions in sight, spurring outcries from New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy and Governor Cuomo. The city is seeing an average of 2,000 new cases every day, doubling since last month. Yet according to a recent survey from the health department, 20% of city residents said they wouldn't get the vaccine, and 27% said they weren't sure if they would. City Councilman Rafael Salamanca announced his run for Bronx Borough President, saying he's the man for the job in the midst of the pandemic because of his housing activism and his prior experience working as a healthcare administrator. Queens Councilman Donovan Richards revealed his transition after his victory for Queens Borough President, mere days before he was set to take over from acting Borough President Sharon Lee. Richards was sworn in on Wednesday, becoming the first black Queens Borough President in the position's 122 years of existence. There might be a third-party contender entering the mayoral race next year, as former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, known for his pushing a universal basic income as a policy solution, is in a survey testing to see who New Yorkers want for mayor. Meanwhile, Isaac Wright Jr., the man who was the subject of the show For Life when he became a lawyer in jail to fight his imprisonment, announced his candidacy for New York City mayor as well. Trump's estranged niece, Mary Trump, who authored a book psychoanalyzing the president and his family, is hosting an online fundraiser for Maya Wiley, de Blasio's former counsel and MSNBC analyst. Former Citigroup executive Ray McGuire made his rounds in the media circuit this week, fielding questions about where he is on different policy proposals. He especially raised eyebrows by not specifying whether he would be in favor of a wealth tax, which would increase taxes on the rich like McGuire himself in New York. McGuire is one of the most successful black businessmen on Wall Street and is styling himself as a moderate figure with a financial background much like former Mayor Mike Bloomberg. Other mayoral hopefuls are crying foul that Maya Wiley, de Blasio's former counsel, is still being seen on MSNBC, where she works as an analyst, saying that she is unfairly being allowed to boost her candidacy. The MTA isn't going to get 535 of their redesigned subway cars costing $1.4 billion until next year because of the pandemic slowing down the supply chain. The MTA also said in its financial disclosure forms that congestion pricing, the plan to toll drivers driving below 61st Street in Manhattan, is going to be delayed for 2 more years because of the pandemic. Meanwhile, de Blasio chose Margaret Forgione to replace outgoing Transportation Commissioner Polly Trottenberg. Forgione worked as the Transportation Department's Manhattan Borough Commissioner for 14 years and is set to become acting commissioner on December 11th. Meanwhile, 5 workers at the MTA were charged with overtime fraud at the agency, including one worker that made it seem like he was being paid $461,000 a year. According to a study by a group of scientists called Climate Central, published in Environmental Research Letters and reported by the Brooklyn paper, found that huge parts of the Brooklyn coastline are going to be flooded annually by 2050, including Coney Island and Brighton Beach, as well as the Brooklyn Navy Yard and the Gowanus Canal. The Department of City Planning already released a plan that would allow homeowners in those coastal areas to adapt their homes around rigid zoning rules. The City Planning Department is also implementing new initiatives for its Gowanus Neighborhood Plan, attempting to manage stormwater, among other things, to reduce flooding in the Gowanus. A New York Times report revealed that according to 2 whistleblowers, the tour boat operating company New York Waterway was responsible for releasing waste from the boat's toilets straight into the Hudson River. The company denies the allegations. Opponents of the plan to kick out 200 adult single homeless men from the Upper West Side Lucerne Hotel rallied around the hotel, expressing hope that the appeals process will deliver a reversal from the trial court that set the stage for the homeless men's expulsion to the Radisson Hotel on Wall Street. 3 of the homeless Lucerne residents who tried to intervene in the case, but were swatted down, have filed their appeal this week. As we cover in a bit, a New York State appellate court ordered a 2-week stay that'll let homeless residents remain at the Lucerne for the time being. On the eviction front, even though a eviction moratorium was extended, it didn't cover those living in basement apartments, and those evictions have increased between March and October, becoming a serious issue. Documented NY reported that undocumented immigrants are a huge population that are being left out of government rental assistance programs. In Crown Heights, residents living in notorious landlord Jason Korn's buildings have been on a rent strike since May, but Korn has still been busy evicting them and filing evictions in housing court. The police are solving fewer crimes in the pandemic, according to the Wall Street Journal, reporting that 26% of serious crimes are being solved in the second quarter of the year, compared to almost 36% during the same period last year. The Manhattan DA announced an investigation against Reverend George William Rutler, a prominent New York priest, for allegedly sexually assaulting his female security guard. Meanwhile, the Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance's top aide, Chief ADA Karen Friedman Agnifilo, resigned, which some sources point to as a sign that he will not run for re-election next year. The Metropolitan Detention Center keeps being the center of attention in the worst ways. The jail saw 55 confirmed cases of COVID between Tuesday to Thursday of this week alone, presenting an outbreak that endangers many inmates in poor conditions. Moving on to the city council, the special election in the Bronx, meant to replace disgraced former city councilman Andy King, might hit a few snags as staff at the Bronx Board of Elections came down with coronavirus. The election is supposed to be held on December 22nd, with the winner serving out the rest of King's term. The Council Committee on Government Operations will conduct a hearing on the Board of Elections and Campaign Finance Board's capability to pull off ranked choice voting and keep the electorate informed. The hearing will take place on Monday, simultaneously considering a bill from Councilwoman Ampry Samuel that would codify ranked choice voting education efforts. Moving on to Cuomo. Cuomo said the state tested positive in the beginning of the week at a rate of almost 4%, the highest in more than 6 months. Cuomo also ordered hospitals to increase the number of beds and find more staff as numbers keep rising. Following the CDC's announcement that first responders and nursing home residents and staff should get vaccines first, Cuomo announced that New York State will be receiving 170,000 vaccines on December 15th, and the first group to receive them in the state will be nursing homes and staff in those facilities.
The first vaccine delivery to New York will be 170,000. The federal government distributes the vaccine by percentage of population of that state. So state's population divided by available dosages is what the state gets. There's no discretion in how much the state gets. It's purely a percent of population, which is what they say at least. We expect, if all safety and efficacy approvals are granted, those doses will arrive on December 15th. By the end of December, the administration suggests that there'll be enough to vaccinate 20 million people with 2 dosages, which is 40 million dosages. That means 6% of Americans. Gives you an idea of where we're going to be coming into January. And those 6% will be prioritized as the healthcare workers, seniors in congregate facilities, etc.
New York State, like many other states, saw a catastrophic rise in deaths in nursing homes, largely because in New York's case, a memo from the Department of Health mandated that nursing home residents be sent back to nursing homes instead of being required to stay in hospitals if they have COVID. Almost 1,000 nurses went on strike against 2 hospitals, chiefly Montefiore New Rochelle Hospital and Albany Medical Center, over worker protections and contract negotiations. The nurses from New Rochelle said they weren't even allowed to go back to work after the end of their strike as retaliation. Police broke up a 400-person party in a Long Island mansion, a continuing trend of New Yorkers breaking the rules in order to flout COVID rules and underground parties. Buffalo, New York is seemingly getting hit by the pandemic worse than in the spring, with 842 people in Erie County succumbing to COVID and 432 hospitalized. Nassau County's executive Laura Curran said the Long Island County is freezing property values until 2023 because of economic volatility associated with the pandemic. Following on the heels of the governor, Attorney General Letitia James called for Congress to make sure that everyone in the U.S. have access to the COVID vaccine equitably, especially black and brown Americans. Cops who are accused of wrongdoing in one police department are allowed to get a job at a different police department because they never lose their enforcement certification. Cuomo said that he is determined to close that loophole. Following in the city's footsteps, Albany County formed a new program designed to handle mental health 911 calls, sending out social workers and EMS instead of regular police units, which have been highlighted in the news for tragedies where the police ended up killing those suffering from mental health episodes. Cuomo signed a bill this week that would allow a nonprofit that monitors prison oversight, Correctional Association of New York, to gain easier access to prison facilities and hold confidential conversations with inmates outside of prison guards' hearing. Resorts World Casino in Queens is seen largely as a success during the pandemic as it generated $3 billion for the New York Lottery's education fund and got the city $1.5 billion last fiscal year. Moving on to Albany. Democratic Assembly members met this week to discuss what their policy plans will be with their new supermajority as well as how to include the progressive wing of the party. Meanwhile, state Senate Democrats announced a victory over a Long Island state Senate district, cementing their supermajority when Democrat John Mannion beat his Republican challenger. 2 state lawmakers, State Senator Brad Hoylman and Assemblyman Harvey Epstein, are working together to pass a bill that would give restaurants and bars a 1-week sales tax holiday to help struggling businesses. State Senator Andrew Lanza was almost arrested forcing his way into Mac's Public House, a Staten Island bar that has been deliberately disobeying state and city COVID rules and shut down this week after numerous warnings and fines. Lanza said that he was there in his capacity as the bar's, quote, free lawyer, and upon being asked to show a retainer, Lanza took out a cardboard box with the word retainer on it, signing it along with the bar owner, and tried showing that as proof. Since that day, the city shut down Mac's bar after numerous health code violations and arrested its owner, Daniel Presti. Supporters of the bar came out in droves in Staten Island, which included those who opposed pandemic restrictions like mask wearing and social distancing, and even included the likes of the Proud Boys, the right-wing nationalist group known for engaging in political violence. Presti was charged with obstructing governmental administration, and upon his release after being charged, went right back to opening his bar and letting people dine there for free. Moving on to the state courts. 5 parents from Cattaraugus County in western New York filed a case in court challenging Governor Cuomo's COVID school restrictions, including masking, social distancing, and online schooling, among other things, saying those policies violate the U.S. Constitution. Despite New York City's efforts to come back from the damage it took on during the pandemic, the number of jury trials still remained very low, as to be expected. The city held only 9 trials, with the pandemic almost wrecking every step of the process in each of those trials. As mentioned earlier, a 5-judge panel at the New York Supreme Court Appellate Division reversed a lower court ruling that threw out a challenge against kicking out the 200 homeless men staying at the Upper West Side Lucerne Hotel. The reversal means that their homeless Lucerne residents have 2 more weeks to stay. Moving on to Trump. After Pennsylvania's certification of Biden's win last week, Georgia and Wisconsin certified Biden's victory this week, officially closing off any hope Trump had for pulling a victory out of nowhere after all the votes had been counted. Trump's campaign paid $3 million for a recount in Wisconsin that only yielded 87 more votes for Biden. More sources are reporting to news outlets that Trump is seriously considering a 2024 presidential run. He apparently said so himself at an indoor holiday party at the White House.
But it's been an amazing 4 years. We're trying to do another 4 years. Otherwise, I'll see you in 4 years. Some very big things are happening. You see the fraud hearings going on right now in Michigan.
Trump's White House communications director, Alyssa Farah, resigned this week, planning to start a consulting firm. Farah was press secretary to the vice president and then the Defense Department before moving on to the president. In a 46-minute video, Trump went on record to attempt to control the narrative about his election loss, claiming that there was massive corruption and that he won the election. Donald Trump, in fact, lost the election.
At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly.
False. We investigated this claim 27 days ago. The charts seemed to show a spike, but it was actually due to a typo. Instead of 15,000, someone put in 150,000. The error was only online, not in an official vote count, and quickly fixed. The official numbers were never wrong.
In one Michigan county, as an example, that used Dominion systems, they found that nearly 6,000 votes had been wrongly switched from Trump to Biden.
False. Fact-checked 20 days ago. A county clerk in Michigan forgot to update a voting machine, which caused the online preliminary report to be off. But they caught the issue because the county had a paper count of the votes, which showed the difference. The votes had never been switched, and the issue only affected the preliminary count online. But that wasn't the only claim the president made about Dominion.
Who owns it, which we don't know? Where are the votes counted, which we think are counted in foreign countries, not in the United States?
We do actually know who runs Dominion. Their CEO is John Poulos. He testified before Congress about voting security in January of this year.
My name is John Poulos, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Dominion Voting Systems.
Government documents from the Election Assistance Commission do show that Dominion is an American company headquartered in Denver, Colorado. As for the claim that votes were counted outside the United States, there's literally no evidence to back that up. We broke this claim down 13 days ago with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and verifiedvoting.org, showing that almost all U.S. states have a paper trail, and those votes are counted in the counties that they're cast in. Keep in mind, while there are still ongoing lawsuits in some states, so far none of them have turned up issues that would change the outcome of the election or indicate a scheme to rig or steal the election.
Trump also spent time going after his own Attorney General, Bill Barr, who came out this week to say that the DOJ hasn't found evidence of election fraud, certainly not to the effect that it would reverse the election. Trump immediately summoned his Attorney General after Barr said that, and there were even rumors Trump was about to fire Barr.
Mr. President, can I ask you to respond to the comments by your Attorney General, who indicated he has not seen at this point any evidence of fraud enough to overturn the election results? Given that, why is now not the time to concede?
Well, he hasn't done anything, so he hasn't looked. When he looks, he'll see the kind of evidence that right now you're seeing in the Georgia Senate. You know, they're going through hearings right now in Georgia, and they're finding tremendous volumes, so they haven't looked very hard, which is a disappointment, to be honest with you, because it's massive fraud. Whether you go to Wisconsin, where we just filed a case, or Michigan, or if you look at what's happening in Georgia, as an example, or Pennsylvania, if you look at Nevada, which is moving along very rapidly, or Arizona, you saw those numbers come out yesterday, we found massive fraud, and in other states also. This is probably the most fraudulent election that anyone's ever seen.
Do you still have confidence in Bill Barr?
Ask me that in a number of weeks from now.
It seems Barr is safe for now. Trump's personal lawyer and point person in his efforts to overturn the election, Rudy Giuliani, appeared at a Michigan legislative hearing with a series of witnesses that made harebrained allegations of fraud during ballot counting without evidence, including one woman that became momentarily viral for the way she spoke to lawmakers.
This election, I will say, these Democrats took every avenue possible to commit fraud in this election, and what I saw on the 3rd and 4th was over 20 counts of fraud being taking place in front of my face. The poll book is completely off. Completely off.
Off by 30,000?
I'd say that poll book is off by over 100,000. That poll book, why don't you look at the registered voters on there? How many registered voters are on there? Do you even know the answer to that?
No, I guess I'm trying to get to the bottom of this here.
Zero. There's zero.
So my question then is if the...
Guess how many, wait, what about the turnout rate? 120%?
Let's let Representative Johnson ask his question, please.
So the poll book number, there's two things that could happen here. Either the poll book number, if ballots were counted multiple times, there's two options. Option number one is that the poll book numbers are not going to match.
They don't.
The actual. Not by thousands and thousands of votes. That's not what we see right now.
Take a look again. Take a look again.
Option number two is that they essentially were filling in names of people who didn't vote.
Dead people too?
So is that?
Let's
I guess,
let
is that
Representative Johnson ask his question, and then when
I
he's
thought that
done,
was his answer. Okay.
Well, I guess that's my question here is why we're not seeing the poll book off by 30,000 votes. That's not the case.
What did you guys do? Take it and do something crazy to it?
I'm just saying the numbers are not off by 30,000 votes. So
I know what I
saying
saw.
That they're filling in?
I know what I saw, and I signed something saying that if I'm wrong, I can go to prison. Okay. Did you?
Okay,
I'm just trying to ask you a legitimate question here.
Yeah, let's let Representative Johnson ask his question, and then don't interrupt him, and then if you want to respond to it, that's fine. And did you have more, Representative?
Yeah, I guess I just want to keep following back up with the poll book. So are we saying that the poll book is either wildly off or that they are filling in names?
It's wildly off, and dead people voted, and illegals voted.
Meanwhile, Trump's apparent eyes and ears at the DOJ, according to the Associated Press, Heidi Stirrup, was banned from the DOJ office building where she works after allegedly trying to pressure her colleagues to give up information about election fraud cases. The president went on to travel to Georgia this Saturday for a rally, seeking to get supporters together for Republicans David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, facing against Democrats John Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock, respectively, in January runoffs that will decide control of the Senate chamber. Trump's controversial public health advisor Scott Atlas resigned this week. Atlas, never having been trained on infectious diseases as a specialty, made all sorts of proclamations about the pandemic, including pushing herd immunity as a solution, which would require the deaths of tens of millions of Americans to achieve. Politico reported that Trump doesn't have a plan in place on how to dole out vaccines when they're low in number, leaving governors to compete with each other on how to get any dwindling vaccines. Pharmaceutical company Moderna said it was applying for an emergency authorization from the FDA for its COVID vaccine, which has 94% effectiveness. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is still planning to move forward with a series of holiday parties that are usually scheduled for diplomats and foreign dignitaries during this time of year, but is refusing to cancel them despite the pandemic raging throughout the country. The invites for 900 guests to the parties were sent out, and state officials insist that social distancing and mask requirements will be upheld despite catering and socializing being encouraged. CDC Director Robert Redfield sounded the alarm this week, saying that January and February are going to be the most difficult time in the public health history of this nation.
We now begin to turn the corner with the vaccine, but the reality is December and January and February are going to be rough times. I actually believe they're going to be the most difficult time in the public health history of this nation. We are at a very pivotal time in this pandemic. Unfortunately, we're experiencing a substantial surge across the nation, where we now have really a significant number of our jurisdictions and states that are really in what we call the red zone. 90% of our hospitals in this nation are actually in what we call one of the hot zones, in the red zones. Therefore, at risk for increased hospitalization and potential to negatively impact hospital capacity. 90% of all of our long-term care facilities now are in what we call high transmission zones. So we are at a very critical time right now about being able to maintain the resilience of our healthcare system.
President-elect Biden fractured his foot at the start of the week playing with his dog, having to wear a medical boot for the next few weeks. Scrutiny has started to come in for Biden's cabinet picks as past ties to consulting and investment firms fills profiles of those such as Secretary of State pick Anthony Blinken and Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Biden has also chosen the first all-female press staff, trying to make further strides to make his White House look like the rest of the country. Biden also chose Brian Deese, a BlackRock executive, which made progressives super excited, to be his director of the National Economic Council in the White House. Biden also chose Jeff Zients to be his White House COVID coordinator and Vivek Murthy to reprise his role as Surgeon General from Obama's term in office as Surgeon General. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris chose Tina Flournoy, Bill Clinton's current chief of staff, as her new chief of staff, Nancy McEldowney as her national security advisor, and Rohini Kosoglu as domestic policy advisor. Biden later in the week urged Congress to keep working on a COVID relief bill using the $900 billion relief plan that was announced this week as a basis. However, the president-elect is wary of provoking Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, since it's a real possibility McConnell may maintain control of the Senate, effectively spelling out the fate of Biden's policy proposals. As part of Biden's COVID plans, the president-elect plans to ask Americans to wear masks for his first 100 days in office, expanding mask mandates to properties where the federal government has control and relying on Americans' goodwill to do the rest.
On the first day I'm inaugurated, to say I'm going to ask the public for 100 days to mask. Just 100 days to mask. Not forever, 100 days.
Infectious disease expert Dr. Fauci said that the plan was a good idea and also accepted an offer on the spot to continue being Biden's National Institute of Infectious Disease chair and chief medical advisor. The three former presidents before Trump, Obama, Bush, and Clinton, vowed to publicly take the COVID vaccine in order to tamp down fear about inoculating oneself against the virus. The weekly labor report showed a slowdown in hiring as only 245,000 jobs were filled last month. The unemployment rate fell 0.2% to 6.7% overall, largely attributable to people stopping looking for work. People who have been out of the job market for more than 6 months make up 40% of the unemployment rate right now. Weekly unemployment claims fell by 75,000 this week for an overall number of 712,000 claims after 2 straight weeks of increasing. Millions of Americans are at risk of losing their unemployment benefits due to the expiration of the CARES Act law that allowed for the extension of those benefits on December 27th. That's when it'll expire. Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, notoriously disliked by teachers' unions, extended a moratorium on federal student loan payments through the end of January as the economy struggles to recover. The Republican chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai, is resigning his chairmanship on January 20th of next year. Pai was an enemy of progressives that want the internet to be regulated like a utility and opposed net neutrality, the policy of allowing internet companies to price gouge website access. As part of the series of things Trump is doing before he leaves office to give Biden a harder time, the president said he would go ahead with an auction next month for drilling rights in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska. Biden has said that he opposes such auctions and would protect the refuge. With the little remaining time he has, Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner tried to hold talks to try and reconcile the relationship between the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Those talks have failed to yield any deal as of the recording of this episode. The assassination of the Iranian scientist largely responsible for the country's nuclear program took the Middle East by storm, with the Islamic country blaming the U.S. and Israel without evidence. President Trump has ordered for all American troops to leave Somalia. The 700 soldiers, mostly special operations forces, were staged in the African country to fight terrorist groups like al-Shabaab. But one of Trump's pledges was to bring back soldiers from places like Afghanistan and Iraq, which he says he's still determined to do before his term is up. General Mark Milley, the nation's top military official, advocated for a relook at permanent overseas bases, saying that the system is too expensive and places military families at risk, and instead urges for there to be rotational deployments to places such as South Korea and Bahrain. Not all of Trump's troop withdrawal ideas are going that smoothly, however, since Congress blocked Trump's troop reduction in Germany, making sure that the next defense authorization bill would let Biden make the decision. Meng Wanzhou, the finance chief of Chinese telecom company Huawei, which the U.S. accuses of stealing proprietary information from American businesses, has been fighting a U.S. extradition battle from Canada, stemming from charges that Wanzhou was instrumental in Huawei helping Iran go around U.S.-placed sanctions. Wanzhou denies the charges, but the DOJ said that they'll let her go back home to China if she admits wrongdoing in the case, but Wanzhou has been reluctant to take the deal. Trump's administration tightened visa rules that would make it more difficult for members of the Chinese Communist Party and their immediate family members from entering the U.S., only allowing for single-entry visas for 1 month. Moving on to Congress, both chambers of Congress were in session this week, taking up a slew of issues, including passing a defense funding bill and taking another look at pandemic relief. A bipartisan group of lawmakers unveiled a $900 billion proposal, which included relief for states and the unemployed, down from the Democrats' original more than $1 trillion demand. Urging for the Senate to accept the new plan as a basis from which to debate different dollar amounts, McConnell shot down the idea of taking up the plan in the Senate, instead referring to a skinny $500 billion plan that Republicans introduced earlier and could not pass. Pelosi said that Congress members cannot leave without passing a new relief bill, seeing as how the government is also going to run out of money by December 11th. The Washington Post surveyed congressional Republicans to see if they were publicly saying Biden won the election, with a shocking 90% not saying who won. 2 Republicans said that Trump won the election outright, while just 25 Republicans acknowledged Biden's win. In the House, Politico's Ali Mutnik reported on how redistricting from the census will already affect certain Congress members as districts are eliminated or redrawn from Rhode Island to Alaska. The House voted to decriminalize marijuana in a 228 to 164 vote along party lines, although the measure stands no chance in the Republican-controlled Senate. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez successfully facilitated a program where volunteers provided free tutoring in Queens and the Bronx, according to the Queens Daily Eagle. However, she was also criticized this week for promoting the sale of $58 hoodies that said tax the rich. Upstate New York Representative Sean Patrick Maloney was elected by the Democratic caucus to serve as the new DCCC chief, which operates as the campaign arm of the Democratic Congressional Group. The saga continues in the lawsuit to settle who is the winner of New York's 22nd congressional district between Democrat Anthony Brindisi and Republican Claudia Tenney, with the lawsuit examining a small number of absentee ballots that could decide who represents the region. Tenney most recently asked the judge to dismiss the lawsuit in a motion. In the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that while the Senate was in session, priorities included passing the defense funding bill, but also continuing to confirm more of Trump's judges to the federal judiciary and not a pandemic relief bill. Biden's pick to head the Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden, might have a hard time passing Senate confirmation if Republicans maintain a hold on the chamber. Tanden isn't popular with Republicans because she is the head of the liberal think tank Center for American Progress and has made some choice comments on Twitter, decrying Republicans in a partisan fashion. Senate Democrats have also expressed concern that Republicans are going to do everything in their power to block judges Biden chooses to fill empty judicial seats, any empty judicial seats that McConnell allows to be empty after the end of Trump's term. The new senator from Arizona, Mark Kelly, was sworn in this week to fill the remainder of the late Senator McCain's term, and flipping the state's remaining red seat to blue, marking the first time that Arizona has had 2 simultaneous Democratic senators since the 50s. The other Democratic senator representing Arizona is Kyrsten Sinema. Moving on to the judicial branch. Shortly after delivering religious freedom proponents a victory against unfair worship gathering restrictions, the Supreme Court heard a case as to why the Trump administration shouldn't be allowed to discount undocumented immigrants in the official census count. However, the justices seemed cold on the idea, not persuaded by arguments to ignore the text of the Constitution, explicitly saying the census should count whole persons in the U.S. Later in the week, the Supreme Court gave a partial win to churches fighting similar church gathering limits in California, with justices advising California judges to reconsider house of worship restriction challenges. D.C. District Judge Beryl Howell unsealed redacted court documents this week that showed the Department of Justice investigating an attempt from 2 years ago to hatch out a pardon exchange for campaign contribution scheme. Jared Kushner's lawyer Ab Lowell said, and Trump fundraiser Elliot Broidy, who himself has pleaded to lobbying violations in October, was approached by billionaire Sanford Diller to get a pardon for psychologist Hugh Barris for tax and Social Security fraud, but those efforts allegedly stopped after Diller died. Barris has since served out his sentence. One of the last lawsuits challenging the presidential election were dismissed this week, in particular one filed by a Pennsylvania GOP congressman trying to throw out mail-in ballots completely. Another lawsuit filed in Georgia by lawyer Sidney Powell, who was recently kicked off the president's legal team, claimed that voting machines provided by the company Dominion purposely rigged votes against Trump. The judge in that case set a hearing date for Wednesday to receive briefs from the Republican Georgia governor and Secretary of State as to why the voting machine shouldn't be inspected, and asked for the contract between the company and the state. After that date passed, Sidney Powell also filed an amended brief that attached numerous affidavits from supposed election observers that claimed to have seen some sort of election fraud, but the affidavits were contradictory in and of themselves and together for making vague claims that never specifically detailed any sort of election fraud. The judge sided with the Republican governor and Secretary of State and denied access to the Dominion voting machines for examination. Trump's legal team filed another lawsuit in Georgia saying that because the state's election laws were completely disregarded and overlooked, that illegal votes were allowed to be counted and that there should be a do-over in that state. Meanwhile, Trump's election law claim in Nevada was also dismissed this week. Trump's daughter Ivanka was deposed in a federal lawsuit concerning fraud surrounding the fundraising of Trump's inauguration in 2017. Trump's inauguration fundraising committee allegedly paid the president's D.C. hotel more than $1 million, possibly violating federal laws to prevent enriching a private person with public funds. Eastern District Federal Judge Nicholas Garofis ruled that the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA, must be reinstated, including the Department of Homeland Security accepting requests from first-time applicants. Garofis had ruled in an earlier case that acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf was in his position illegally, so Wolf's earlier actions trying to stop DACA were void. The DOJ sued Facebook this week, claiming that the social media giant improperly reserved around 2,600 jobs from 2018 to 2019 for H-1B workers or immigrants with job skills which have an employer sponsor for U.S. residents, rather than choosing Americans for work. Facebook denies the allegations and said it won't comment on pending litigation. The Trump administration is bearish on H-1B visas, first rejecting around 21% of applications and then denying them outright since the pandemic started. The court decision that mandated a developer pay graffiti artists for damage that the developer did to their art after demolishing an abandoned structure called 5 Points was ordered to pay an additional $2.7 million in legal fees for the artist's attorneys, which was already on top of the $6.7 million the artists get directly. Court papers from the Southern District of New York show that despite him saying to the contrary, Mayor de Blasio knew about and discussed Ricardo Morales, a former official from the Department of Citywide Administrative Services who was fired from his job and embroiled in a scandal in 2017 to lift deed restrictions on the Rivington House nursing home in the Lower East Side so it could be sold to a private developer for $160 million. Morales sued the city, claiming top officials, including de Blasio, were aware of the deal and didn't have an issue with it until the situation landed in the papers. De Blasio said he wasn't familiar with the specifics of Morales' case in 2017, but the court documents show that de Blasio emailed his staff about Morales a year prior to the scandal breaking out. The Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office sued the New York State town of Airmont in federal court for what they described as anti-Semitic zoning laws that meant to stop Orthodox Jews from taking part in religious services in their own homes and setting up private yeshivas. And finally, in national news, the United States currently has logged almost 14.5 million COVID cases and almost 280,000 deaths as of the time of this recording. The governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, tested positive for COVID this week. The number of Americans being hospitalized for COVID just keeps increasing, with the number up to 100,226 as of the time of this recording. The AP reported the Americans only traveled 5% less than usual this Thanksgiving, largely ignoring pleas and warnings from governments to refrain from traveling to prevent the spread of COVID. Pfizer, in an effort to manage expectations ahead of time before rolling out its vaccines throughout the nation, cut the number of vaccines to 50 million from 100 million. That's it for this week's show in the 25th hour, helping you beat the 24/7 news cycle every Sunday afternoon. A reminder again that we will be taking off for the holidays next Sunday, and we will be seeing you the week after that. I ask that you please rate, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends, and please don't forget to become a patron today at patreon.com/the25thhournews. As always, you can email your tips and suggestions at the25thhournews@gmail.com. Follow us on most of your social media platforms and spread New York City's soon-to-be top-rated political podcast. See you next time.